Hey everyone, today I'm going to cover everything that you can sow 8 weeks before your last frost date. Everything I'm going to show you today needs to be sown either 6 to 8 weeks before your last frost or 8 to 10 weeks before your last frost. When sowing seeds indoors, you want to start with a pre-moistened mix. This is just a seed starting mix made with cocoa coir and perlite. It doesn't need to be soaking, but it should feel damp. After filling your seed starting tray with the mix, you want to tap out any air pockets. Don't press the mix into the cells. It'll compact it too much, and you can just top it off after you've tapped it out. I'm going to be sowing some tomatillo and ground cherries. Now, ground cherries and tomatillos in the same family. The only difference between the two is that ground cherries only need one plant to produce fruit because they are self-pollinating. Unlike tomatillos that require at least 2 plants because they are not self-pollinating. So if you have 2, you increase the chance of actually getting fruit on your plants. So even though I'm starting my tomatillos now 8 weeks out, I'm actually not going to be sowing my tomatoes yet. I'm going to wait until we're 6 weeks before my last frost date. Now, tomatillos can benefit from the extra 2 weeks because in my experience, my tomatillos have always been much smaller compared to the tomatoes when they're being planted out. So I want to give them a couple of extra weeks. The reason I'm waiting to plant the tomatoes, now last year I did plant them 8 weeks out, is because last year we had a very cold and rainy spring. And I didn't get them I plant them in bags. I didn't get them in the bags until the end of May. So by the time I planted them out, they were, I don't know if they're about that big. And when you're trying to harden off 30 tomatoes that are that big, bringing them in, bringing them out, bringing them in, bringing them out in in a flimsy kind of container, they're very hard to manage. They're also very hard to plant when they're that size because tomatoes like to be buried deep. I plant mine on their side, which I'll show you when I do plant them out. And when they're that big, it's almost impossible to get them properly in the soil and planted deeply enough for them to grow properly. So I'm gonna give them a couple of extra weeks before I start them. And if we have weather like we've been having, which is really cold, it's been snowing constantly, freezing temperatures, if that carries into to like late spring, I won't be planting my tomatoes out until the end of May. And so I don't wanna have these giant tomato plants, that I need to be bringing in and out when I'm hardening them off. And by the time I get them planted, they're just going to be so big, and you risk breaking them, damaging the leaves, the stems. So it's always better to just, if you can, give them, you don't need to plant them right away. Even if the seed packets recommend like 6 to 8 weeks, you can, for my recommendation would be to plant them closer to the 6 weeks than the 8. Because the tomatillos are being planted in these pint-sized containers versus seed starting cells, which is where they'll remain until they're planted out, I'm taking my seed starting mix, which is cocoa coir and perlite. I'm adding in some bark fines to help with aeration and some worm castings, which will help to give them some more nutrients. I'm also only filling these containers about halfway up. As the tomatillos grow, just like tomatoes, they form roots along their stem. So as the tomatillo grows, I will continue to add more and more mix into the pot, and that will help to further strengthen their stem. And then they're just sown as per the seed packet at about a 1/4 inch deep. Now, even though this is a pre-moistened mix, I will add a little bit of water. I want good contact between the soil and the seed. In one of my recent videos, I covered a topic called cold stratification. Cold stratification is basically the process that is meant to mimic the dormancy of winter. And it benefits perennials, not all of them, but there are some that benefit from that period of cold, and it does help them to germinate better. So 2 weeks ago, I cold stratified rosemary and lemon balm. And basically the process is you take the seeds, you put them on a damp paper towel, and then you put them in a freezer bag, put them in the refrigerator for a minimum of 2 weeks, but you could put them in there up to 2 months. It just really does depend on the seed. I also cold stratified black-eyed Susan. It's also known as Rudbeckia, and that actually requires a period of longer cold stratification, so that needs about 30 days, 30 to 60 days actually. So I will take that out in 2 weeks. So when I do my video 6 weeks before my last frost date, I will sow those black-eyed Susans. So both rosemary and lemon balm require light to germinate, so I'm gonna sow them in a tray with some other things that also require light to germinate. So if you're, if you have seedling trays, like this one, for example, this is a 40 cell seedling tray. Try to match plants and herbs, flowers, vegetables that have similar requirements. Either their germination times are similar or their light requirements are similar. So as they germinate, they're either all germinating at the same time or relatively around the same time, and they're under the same conditions. Either they could be, you know, germinating in the dark, and then once they poke through, you can move them to the light, or you need to be germinating them directly in the light. So along with the lemon balm and the rosemary, I'm also going to be planting lettuces. Now, lettuce requires light to germinate, so this is why I'm planting these together. Lettuce is a cool weather crop. So lettuce you want to get in the garden in early spring. You can also plant it again in fall. Once the heat of summer starts to come around, it's going to bolt and it just won't produce at all. Lettuce is also a cut and come again, so you can either take the whole head or you could just take the outer leave the core intact, and it will just keep producing outer leaves, and you will have lettuce for several weeks. I am giving it a head start by sowing it indoors. It can also be sown directly outdoors before your last frost date. However, I'm going to be sowing it indoors, and I will also be planting it out a few weeks before my last frost date when the seedlings are very young. And I'm going to interplant it with carrots and beets, onions, and then peas, which all make really great companion plants for lettuce. I'm also going to be sowing anise. Anise is in the parsley family. It puts on these umbels. It's related to fennel, and it attracts pollinators, specifically attracts butterflies. So I'm growing it for butterflies, and I'm very big on attracting pollinators, giving bees and other insects that benefit my garden both water and something to feed on, because it's really important, especially in the heat of the summer, that they have that. I'll also be planting chamomile, and like lemon balm, both can be used to make teas. So you could freeze dry it or just dry it, you know, in an air dryer, and then you could use it to make tea. When sowing seeds that require light to germinate, you want to place the seed on top of the soil and then just gently press it in. Next, I'm going to be sowing onions. Now, 2 weeks ago, I sowed some green onions. Onions need to be sown 8 to 10 weeks before your last frost date, so this is likely going to be the last week that you can sow onions in your area. Up in the corner, I'm going to put a chart that shows you the different types of bulbing onions. You want to make sure you're planting the right onion for your area, whether it's a short day, an intermediate day, or a long day onion. So definitely check out that chart and make sure that you're planting the right onion for your location. When sowing onions, they need to be sown about 1/4 inch deep, and then just gently push the soil back on top. I am also going to be sowing some Bok Choy and Lovage. Now, Bok Choy, and this is actually a smaller version of Bok Choy. It's also a cooler weather crop like lettuce, so it's best planted in spring and fall, and I'm going to interplant this the same way I'm going to interplant the lettuce with the root crops. And then Lovage is actually like an herbal version of celery. It's got a similar flavor profile, maybe a little stronger. It's got some cumin notes to it. It's a perennial, and it grows really big. So you can actually use this the same way you would use celery, perfect in like soups and stews, even in like salads and sandwiches. Both of these have similar requirements. They don't need light to germinate, and they can be sown 1/4 inch deep. They germinate within like 10 to 14 days. So these are perfect companions for the seedling tray. The sowing is exactly the same. It's 1/4 inch deep here. So you just put your seeds in your hole and then gently push the soil back in place. I'm also going to be sowing some dahlia seeds. Now, dahlias are really beautiful. They grow anywhere from 1 foot to 6 feet tall. They bloom from midsummer to fall. So if you're planting a lot of different types of flowers, it's always important to know like the bloom times of those flowers. I'll be planting poppies as well, and I'll go over that in a little bit and how I'm starting them indoors because they also require cold stratification. And I'm also planting other things, like I mentioned, the black-eyed Susans. I'm planting petunias. I got marigolds and geraniums and a whole bunch of other things, but these all bloom at different times. So these will be interplanted with the poppies. So as the poppies die back in late spring, because poppies bloom from like late winter to late spring, these will start to fill in that space of where that like dying foliage is of the poppies. Dahlias need to be planted shallowly, so about 1/8 of an inch. So I'm only going to cover them with just the slightest bit of soil. They don't require light to germinate, but they should not be planted deeply. And the unusual thing is they're so large, you would expect them to be planted deeper, but they're not. So you just put them on top of the soil, gently press them in, and just sprinkle just a little bit of soil on top, or you can even use a little bit of vermiculite if you have it on hand. Earlier, I mentioned poppy seeds. Now, poppy seeds require a period of cold stratification. They should be direct sown in the garden, and they require light to germinate. I'm going to cold stratify these in mini ice cubes, and they will remain in the freezer for about 3 to 4 weeks. In late winter, I will just drop the cubes where I want the poppies to grow. This will mimic the environment that poppies love to grow in, which is a very cold environment. They even often grow through the snow, and a lot of people just sprinkle the seeds on top of snow, and when the snow melts, it will bring it in contact with the soil. So I have all the trays now in the greenhouse. They also have humidity domes on them, and they're on heat mats. They'll remain that way until they germinate, and then they'll be moved under the lights. You do want to check the moisture level of your soil every couple of days, and if it looks like it's drying out, you do want to give it a little bit of moisture. And then here I have the tray that required light to germinate. Now I also have some trays in here that were sown 2 weeks ago. They are fully germinated. I think maybe one cell didn't germinate. That's kale, and a couple of them already have true leaves. In this tray, I have the green onions. It's a little hard to see them. They are still germinating. It's been like a bit of a staggered process with those. This is petunia. They actually almost all germinated. It's really hard to see them because they're so super tiny. I'm try to point out one for you, but yeah, they're so tiny, it's almost hard to see them, but they have fully germinated, which is great. And then here are the geranium that I planted 2 weeks ago. A lot of them are already establishing true leaves. They're actually getting watered right now. Once your seedlings emerge, you should be bottom watering. So that's what I'm doing here. I have them in a 10-20 tray, and I poured water into the bottom of the tray, and so they're soaking it up through the bottom. Until they've germinated, you can safely water on top of the soil. However, once they have germinated, you do want to give them bottom water. This is the time that I was concerned about germinating, and almost all of them have germinated, so that's also really great. And here are my pepper seedlings. I sowed these 6 weeks ago because they take a long time to grow. Despite their small appearance, they are establishing a robust root system. I'm going to aim to pot these up this week. Peppers grow very slowly, and hot peppers grow even slower than sweet peppers. I have a lot of hot pepper varieties here. They do have one set of true leaves on them, but know that if you are growing peppers, the early stages of growth are very slow. Once I pot these up, I should see an explosion of top growth. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe so you don't miss my upcoming videos.